Three, two, one, and we're live. So, welcome to the podcast, joined by David McGettigan. I'll let you introduce yourself, David. It's probably better than me.
Thanks, Nathan. Thank you. I suppose probably with all the people that have been in this podcast, I might be coming out from a slightly different angle. I'm a therapist. I work with people with chronic pain. I use movements, neurological work, education, and I suppose like an individualized approach, taking in the whole person to work with people who have chronic symptoms. It would be kind of a short answer version of where I'm from or what I'm at.
So, a large part of it is like kind of chronic pain or chronic
So
discomfort people have.
yeah, just saying a moment ago, most of the people I will see will have pain for more than maybe 3 to 6 months. That have been to see generally some other practitioners of different descriptions, like physio or an osteopath or maybe a chiropractor, massage, stuff like that. And in some cases that makes a lot of change for them, in some cases it doesn't, and they're still looking for something to help them to move forward. So that's kind of what I end up attracting, shall I call it.
Your target audience.
Yeah, well, that's the kind of people who end up giving me a call every so often to work with. So yeah,
It's a fascinating field. I mean, like, obviously, thank you for coming on. Yeah, I mean, I think for anyone involved in any physical activity, eventually, well, hopefully not, but eventually, some sort of injury will happen or something niggling will happen. I mean, for myself, I'm dealing with the issue with my wrist for 2 odd years, but it's a common one, I think, for a lot of people. I mean, like from my own background, I was worked with and trained in a lot of combat arts and martial arts over the past years. Those guys are terrible for it because it's just you get an injury and you just accept it. It's just like, oh well, it's just everyone has it. I was talking to a jiu-jitsu guy, a black belt recently, just kind of just saying like, oh my lower back's giving me pain. It's giving me pain for a year more. That's it. And I was like, oh, have you tried to fix it? Oh no, sure, everyone has back pain at my level. It's like they don't have to.
Yeah, it's not a not optional thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely, there's a lot of people out there who are living with pain. I suppose when I literally just moved back to Dublin a couple of months back, just set up my practice and all that. But I ran a little competition, a kind of clinic opening thing, and I couldn't believe the amount of kind of coverage it got, because there are so many people here in Ireland and obviously further afield as well that are living with pain every day. And the kind of helper in me would like to say that, yeah, well, let's help everyone and let's get rid of it. It's not possible to help everybody, but it's definitely something that can be changed. People can move forward past a lot of severe chronic symptoms. It's definitely possible. So if there's anyone out there that is listening that has got pain, it can change. It's not definite. It's not always going to be there. It's possible to change.
What I really like about what you do as well is that you try to make people aware of what's going on. I find a lot of people, it's like we were chatting about earlier, it's just give me the solution straight away, just tell me what it is, rather than understanding like maybe this is being caused from this, maybe this is a roundabout result of this.
I think most of the stuff I see is there's a big person to person it varies, but there's a lack of awareness about what contributes to pain. So I wouldn't say that in any person I've seen have the odd story here or there, but there's one thing that causes their pain. There's generally a lot of things. Most people who end up with chronic symptoms that I see anyway will come in and they'll have problems with sleep, they'll have problems with maybe digestive symptoms, they'll have probably problems with their energy levels as well. It kind of seems to be, it's a kind of more expansive problem than just pain. It seems to accompany all that kind of what I sometimes call the chronic trio of issues that will appear with chronic pain. So it has to be kind of an individualized approach, but also looking not just at pain, starting to help a person to understand what happens when they become stressed, what happens when they become fearful of their pain and stuff like that. And I suppose I'm trying to get to is that education for each person on what's happening in their body is massive. It's a really, really big part of what I do. I was speaking about it earlier with you. There's a lot of people out there who have a lot of false beliefs about their body. There's a lot of people out there who believe that some issues with osteoporosis, but basically thinks that her spine is crumbling. And that's a powerful piece of language to come out of. If that's your belief, that's powerful. Of course, there are some conditions that are, that will lend itself to structural change in the body more readily, but beliefs about movement are rife in I suppose, in the people that I see. So I like to help people to dispel the stuff that isn't necessarily founded in truth, and give them something more supportive, because it helps them to not have as much pain if they understand how movement affects their body and how pain affects their movement and stuff like that. So
yeah, I mean, like we kind of touched on it earlier before the podcast. We were just kind of saying that, like, language, like what that lady said to you, it can be such a powerful tool in what people had even you aware of Phil Greenfield?
Yeah, I know Phil.
Yeah, like he kind of said something recently about how there's pain that you feel, there's pain you endure, and there's kind of your perception of pain.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, like, for a lot of people, kind of with the language side of things, that you kind of, like, one I hear all the time is, I have a weak core.
Yeah. Oh God.
Yeah. And it's like, well, if you can stand up, you're probably all right. Like, and I don't mean that in a facetious way, but like, is it fit for purpose? And I think with what you guys do, or with what you do, that it's a big thing that, like, someone kind of interprets, like, oh, my spine is crumbling, or whatever is injured, or it's very kind of narrow view of, like, oh, this has to be fixed. This is holding my life back.
When you start to kind of talk to people about how their beliefs about their body impact upon their body and upon their movement and upon their pain, and they sometimes get light bulb moments when they say, oh God, I didn't realise that something I had been told or I had heard, and it might even be from someone in a medical professional. And so many people say to me, oh yeah, my neighbour down the street, he has a really bad back, and every time he has a really bad back, he says that he swears by it, he shouldn't bend over and touch his toes, he shouldn't bend over and tie his laces. So anytime my back gets bad, I don't do that either. And I'm kind of saying, well, look, that's kind of, it's like an old wives' tale that kind of gets passed on. And that essentially is changing how the person moves. So they've got fear of avoidance then of actually bending over and picking something up based on something that they've heard that probably isn't true. Well, it isn't true. Spines are made to move that way. So it's mad how stuff like that can really, really make a big difference whenever you get the person to understand that actually that's not the truth and there's a different alternative.
Like, one I see a lot is, like, when people, like, I don't know what your term you use for it, but I kind of just call it guarding, where someone kind of prevents themselves from
bracing.
Yeah, and I've seen it with all sorts of people, but I remember with one person, like, it really affects how you move. I remember this lady trying to just sit up, but had hurt her back previously and was constantly afraid of hurting her back again, and would couldn't sit up.
Mm-hmm.
Like, from lying, and it really changes how you move, and then that has so many knock-on effects to.
It changes quality of life. At the end of the day, it'll ripple out that far. I would go as far as saying, it really does. A little piece of lack of movement here, or there in your body, and a fear about moving in a certain way. It really does affect things day to day. Like, I mean, a lot of people who can't bend down to pick up the kids, who can't pick up the shopping, who really, really are afraid of doing things like that, and that's. To me, that's an everyday activity that every single person's body is structurally sound, or 99.9% of people should be well able to do that. And it's a fear of that movement that generally will limit that most. Yeah, people definitely have pain, and the pain that they're experiencing is real. A lot of times it's stemmed from a fear based in something that they've heard in the past, which is. I think when you target that and from a therapeutic standpoint, you actually make some shift with that sort of stuff, then people start to. It opens up possibility for them. Possibility is a nice place to play in,
And that's can be such a huge difference to people as well when you teach them rather than just spoon feed them what they want to hear or want to know.
I think that's a massive point as well. I think in terms of people in pain, there's a massive culture of running to doctor or a therapist of some description for them to help you, for them to fix you. I hate the word, for them to fix you. I don't do any fixing whatsoever. I can provide some kind of signposts and guide some traffic a little bit, but the person does all the work. And helping people to take a bit more responsibility, even if they don't understand or don't realize that they aren't taking responsibility. Helping them to do that is a massive piece. Because the idea for me as a therapist is to get to the level where I can actually get people to be able to sort themselves out when they have pain and not to need me. It's a process. It's the goal. It's definitely the goal.
Like, I was watching a documentary the other week about men training for the Arnold Classic for the World's Strongest Man. And just from what you were saying, I had a client say to me a while ago, are you going to shout at me and give out to me in training, and are you going to be like a drill sergeant and all this? I was like, no. Like, if I'm not there, you're not going to have someone shouting at you, so are you going to continue training? And in this documentary, one of the guys, he trains under an old stadium entirely by himself in the cold weather purposely. He says, well, because when no one's here, this is so much harder. You have to know what to do, and you have to be motivated to do it.
Isn't it?
Yeah, and like kind of what you're saying, that like, yeah, you can do everything, but I mean, you see someone for an hour or whatever, and you can't. I mean, there's still 23 other hours in the day for them to do whatever they need to do.
I think that comes back again to the beliefs side of things. If you can make shift there, the other 23 hours of the day are less affected by fearful movement and stuff like that, and that really makes it daily kind of a small change, but makes it big outcome for them. So that ends up hopefully helping people quite a bit. Like
the classic one of like, oh, I'm not flexible. Well, do you do anything to try and get flexible?
I mean, I definitely know myself. If you had asked me to touch my toes 5 or 6 years ago, I probably would have got just past my knees, and that was I had no pain, in terms of playing sport and stuff like that. I wasn't that flexible, and it was kind of a light bulb moment for me as a therapist, that I kind of went, do you know what? If I'm encouraging people to move more into to be more functional in that way, I better walk the walk as well myself. So I've done a lot of work with movement stuff and helping improve my own mobility. Because just because I'm a therapist that helps people with these problems, it doesn't necessarily mean that I don't have issues in my own body myself. I've broken loads of bones, had surgeries, concussions, all the usual stuff. So
I mean, you're human too. So
exactly.
Body.
Exactly. It's a process for everybody, not just for the people who are experiencing it.
Entropy affects us all.
Absolutely.
It's it's that individualized approach, and it's that, like I always say to people, there's no point helping someone who doesn't want help, and I think it's a big problem. Like we were saying earlier, that a lot of people want that kind of cure all, that magic bullet of like, oh, I just want to be pain free now, so just give me the pill, like give me whatever. And
I think what they don't realize is that creates dependence then. And that's an issue. That if somebody finds something like that, it creates a dependence on that, and then if that starts to fail them, then they start to become fearful, because now the thing that used to work for me doesn't work anymore, and now what am I going to find next? What am I going to do? And it's this kind of seeking external means, I suppose, all the time, whereas with maybe a change in beliefs, a little guided movement, a little kind of work on some parts of the body, you can actually create the internal environment where they don't need that anymore, which is the goal, I suppose, in a way.
Yeah, I mean, having that understanding of your own body, I think it's something that it's incredibly lacking.
Absolutely.
Every field, never mind the fitness and the therapy field and everything. I mean, it's...
I could say that every single client I see, I start off with a quick little kind of postural analysis just to see where their skeleton stands on that day, I suppose. And I get them to check in with their feet and just feel where the pressure is from the floor. The amount of people who have never done that before is ridiculous. And I bring them through a little kind of movement screen, I suppose you're going to call it that, from kind of ground up to head. People have never been asked to move their pelvis without moving everything else. They've never been asked to side bend their spine without moving another part of their body. They've never, little rotation, tilting the pelvis, all that sort of stuff. They've never done it. They don't even realise that it's a possibility. And there's a really, really big lack of awareness of what bodies can do.
Yeah.
And I think in terms of, during the work that I do with people, I start to get them to think about that, to tune into that, because if you understand something, you generally will have less fear about it, I hope. Yeah, definitely, through the process of bringing people from chronic symptoms towards getting back to training, getting back to doing what they want to do, there definitely should be a part where they get a system and a way to check in with themselves and to learn about their own body in a simple way, because it's lacking everywhere. You look at people exercising, you look at people even out walking, and like, I'm a movement geek in terms of I study movement day in day out in clinic, in terms of try attempt to interpret where people are not moving as well as they could and what we could do about it and all that sort of stuff. And oh my god, you take me to an airport and I start gawking around me, looking at people going, wow, how does that person manage their centre of mass from A to B, and look at the way they're doing that.
I'm the exact same. It kind of drives my girlfriend up the wall at times where I'm looking at people.
My girlfriend doesn't pay any attention to me anymore in that way. She's probably right.
Like, I do it all the time. I mean, even said it to someone at work recently. I was like, watching someone walk, I was like, it's amazing that person always walks like that. Mm-hmm. He's like, what do you mean? I was like, do you not see that?
And it's not even that. It's the person may not even realise that their pelvis is shifted away over to the left and they're side bending to the right and side bending back in their neck, and this is comfortable for them.
Yeah.
And I suppose you could look at it and say, wow, that is an impressive way of getting around. Is it efficient for that person at the minute? Yeah. Is it going to be efficient forever? Maybe not. Maybe. You don't know. It's amazing to have a little bit of understanding and start to just look around you and open your eyes to what is around. It's crazy.
Like I always say to people, no matter what training you do or whatever your body is pushed to do, it will always try find the path of least resistance. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of the problem. When you don't have that awareness, you're just like, oh, sure, I'll just kind of turn my foot this way, or twist this way, or kind of hobble this way. There's so many crazy knock-on effects. Maybe not right now, but 10, 15, 20 years.
Yeah, that's it. I suppose that would be kind of a big part of what I see in clinic. There's a lot of people who might have had a cruciate ligament injury or an ankle sprain or a concussion or things like that, and your movement can change after those types of injuries. I know you obviously heal quite well, and you can obviously, your brain will protect parts of your body that are healing, etc. at the time of injury, and sometimes that's kind of doesn't shift fully back to where it was, and if that's the case, it does change your movement patterns, and people might not kind of think anything about it at the time, or even when they come in to see someone like me for treatment for something else that seems unrelated. The amount of times that I've resolved an old area of trauma, if you want to call it that isn't moving as cleanly as it could, or as well as it could, getting that to move again actually gets rid of some symptoms somewhere else. So you can see this kind of compensatory knock-on effect quite evident in people's bodies.
Yeah, like I think a big part of that comes from kind of within the fitness world, where people like they view body parts rather than the whole thing. Mm-hmm. Like someone injures their ankle, whereas it might be something up in the hip that's causing that, or whatever. I think people have this very much just like, oh, it's just this one thing. It's not looking at the entire body.
I think that might be controversial where I'm going with this, but that goes back into. To me, it goes into it's everywhere in kind of the medical model at the minute. Yeah. It's reductionist. I'm a knee specialist. I'm a skin specialist, or whatever it's going to be. There's a lot of specialities, and of course there needs to be specialist knowledge in those areas. I think whenever you pigeonhole yourself like that, then it ends up translating outwards as well, and people say, "Oh, it's my ankle." Just because I have pain, you don't necessarily need to have an issue with your ankle to feel pain there,
Kind of that old adage of, when the only tool you have is a hammer and everything looks like a nail. If that's your speciality, you want whatever that person's ailment to be that speciality so that you can help them. Yeah. And that's coming from the best possible place, but, it might not be whatever it is that you do.
Yeah. Gets into some interesting space. I mean, I think every therapist out there is doing that. Is doing their best, and I think they're coming from the right intention. They're attempting to help people first and foremost. I think if you're kind of attempting to make somebody fit into a box that you have, then it's like starts to get into a grey area of are you actually helping them or not, or are you helping yourself in a way?
Yeah, I mean, that's, like, I know within the therapy world and within the kind of fitness world and movement world, whatever you want to call it, that there are those who teach and then there are those who kind of pass on knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
What I mean by that is, like, my biggest goal, and obviously it's a terrible business model, but it's to make yourself obsolete. And
same for me.
Yeah.
Exact same for me. Terrible business model. I think I said it earlier as well. I believe that if I can get people to a level where they understand their bodies enough to have strategies they can use themselves, that they don't even need to come and see me. I mean, I was on Skype to a guy, helping him with some educational stuff that I help with, and was also speaking to another guy who's away over in Lebanon or somewhere, a client of mine, and he was talking about some stuff he was going through at the moment, and I was just checking and saying, well, can you do this? Can you do this? Can you do this? And get him to do some kind of research on what's affecting him at the moment and come back to me, and he knows exactly what he needs to do, which was lovely. So yeah, it's a goal. It's a hard one because everyone that you meet comes in a different space, I suppose you could put it that way. And to get them to the level where they're autonomous and they can do it themselves, is a massive journey. It's a lifelong journey, really, for a lot of people, myself included. Still, the intention has to be there to get people moving in that direction. Pun intended.
Yeah, it's I don't know. It really does baffle me how, like, within the therapy field, I mean, people they want to be just, all right, give me whatever, and fix me now. And I don't want to build that awareness. I don't want to learn how to do it. Just fix it right now. And I think it is kind of I hate that kind of way society's gone, but I think it's just within the medical world and within the I guess it's just how things are marketed. It's like an instant fix for everything.
Yeah.
And it's, like you say, that lifelong journey. It's, again, actually coming back to that documentary, the fella who won that Strongest Man event was the oldest competitor. And everyone kind of joked of, oh, it's that old man strength. And he, they interviewed him. He said, yeah, it took me this long to build this strength.
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, that actually makes a lot of sense. And it's, if someone take any discipline, if someone starts at 10, they're going to be better than the guy who started at 20 if they're both competing at the late 20s.
Yeah, I mean those little. There's a great book. I've told a lot of people about it. It's called The Art of Learning by Josh Waitzkin.
Actually, I have that in the post. That's arriving tomorrow.
We didn't plan that.
No.
I love that book. It's one of my favourite books. So Josh Waitzkin is a double discipline world champion in Tai Chi, push hands, and the moving form. He's also the youngest ever grandmaster chess winner. And his book is all about the principles that are underpin learning and underpin advancement, and it's phenomenal. Just it describes that kind of process of going through a long journey of making loads and loads and loads of mistakes and figuring out the kind of most efficient way to do things and spotting patterns and all that sort of stuff. And it's fab. It's one of my favourite books. So enjoy it.
I'm looking forward to it. I've had so many people recommend it to me, and I've been talking to so many people recently about learning and the skill itself of learning. I mean, obviously, what we both do is trying to teach people things, but the most important part of that is that we continue to keep learning.
Yeah,
and I think that's regardless of the field. Like I always kind of say to people that I learned more when I left school and college than I did within those, because
absolutely, I completely echo that. Like I to a great degree, did 2 years in Carlo when I left secondary school, which was kind of a gap or bridge to get into physio, which I didn't end up doing. I did sports rehabilitation. I did a 3-year degree over in Manchester. I came out with a lot of anatomy, a lot of physiology, and some rehabilitation principles, and was all set to get going with every single person I could get my hands on. And I have to say, for me, it wasn't what I kind of thought it was going to be. It was quite a rude awakening. I came out with certain skills that sometimes worked in clinic in terms of like soft tissue work, strength work, getting people to stretch, to mobilize, to sometimes I would manipulate some joints, stuff like that. Sometimes it would work with people, sometimes it wouldn't. And at the time, I had absolutely no idea what the difference was from one person to the next. And even the people that did help would sometimes come back with the same issue very quickly or a couple of months later, and then the same thing I'd done before wouldn't work. So you're kind of going, what the hell is happening here? It was a process of a lot of failures, I suppose, early on in my kind of therapy career. You definitely say that to leading me to questions, which is what I've ended up kind of pursuing in a way. So it's taken me into different fascial work, into movement work, which forms a big part of what I do, into kind of neurological work, which I've done the last few years, and then education. And I've also studied, or attempted to start to learn how I read all the time about language and communication. I think it's one of the biggest things in therapy setting is understanding how to listen. Is one part, and the next piece is recognizing where a person's at when they come to see you and understanding how they communicate. If I can understand how you communicate, then I can communicate with you more effectively. And it's a massive piece of what I attempt to do. I think it's one of the things that sucks a lot of glucose out of my brain on a daily basis is attempting to explain things in a way that the person's going to understand and make the most kind of impact with them.
That's I actually love that you said that, because it's something that even I was training with a client today, and it's something that I say to people all the time when they go like, oh, you're going to be disappointed in me, and oh, I'm not going to do whatever, and oh, you're going to want me to do this and I can't do that. And I always say to people, no, this where you're at now is where you're at. That's what we're training. We have a goal in mind, but I'm going to train you where you're at now. I'm not going to make you do something you can't do.
Yeah, absolutely. I suppose when someone would come into clinic with me, it's about establishing their baseline, where they're at, and then getting most of their goals in place and understanding how to get them from A to B or A to Z or A to whatever it might be. It's definitely, I think it comes back to what we touched on earlier, the individualization. I think it's starting, we spoke a little bit about it earlier, it's starting to creep into different health fields and training fields and stuff like that. And I think I predicted it'll be everywhere in 20 years' time. It'll be an individualized approach, person to person, about that issue or that goal for that person, because generic stuff helps in a lot of cases. Some cases it doesn't, and the case that it doesn't, it tends to be those people who go further and seek maybe the likes of myself or yourself or someone else to help them with a kind of more individualized process.
I mean, the classic example I always give is, if anyone looks on my Instagram or whatever, they'll see Luke, the other half of my company, and I love using him as the example because we've been best friends since we're like 12. But he's exactly 1 foot shorter than me, and I outweigh him by almost 30 kilos. Okay. So it's, the things it's a massive difference. And I mean, if he trained how I trained and I trained how he trained, it just wouldn't work for the two of us. And I hate how fast he progresses to bodyweight stuff because he's a hell of a lot lighter. But it's that individualization for people. It's so fucking important because, like, obviously, even within the therapy world, no two people have the same injury. No. Even if they have what they think is the same injury as their friend, it could be incredibly different.
No, that's definitely it. I speak to people on the phone generally before I see them in clinic, and their story matters. Yeah. Put it that way. Every single person has a different story. Even twins have different stories. And the meanings that are made at times of injury and stuff like that, even at times of treatment too, vary so much person to person. And I think if you go in and you get your generalized kind of approach, it's missing for a lot of things for a lot of people. I understand the people that use these approaches maybe don't have the time with people to specialise or to individualise, or don't have the means at the time. I think there's definitely a role for both. I think it's starting to appear more and more. I spoke to you earlier about it. I've just started an individualised nutritional protocol with a chap from South Africa, which is
What's his name?
Justin McGuire.
Oh, no, someone else I was thinking of who just moved recently.
No, he's it's a way for me to learn about how I can kind of approach my own training, work, and nutrition and health, I suppose, in a different way, to learn how to optimize myself in a way, can I call it that? But yeah, I'm having a look into that myself, and we'll feedback at some point in the future about how it's going. So
Constantly learning, as you said.
yeah,
And I mean, that's like nutrition plays. Obviously, people get annoyed by, people harping on about it, but it plays such a massive role. I mean, like it's probably the earliest example I remember of someone talking about it, and probably one of the best examples that I kind of use for people was George St. Pierre. He just said, if you had a race car, would you put shitty fuel in it?
Yeah, exactly.
You wouldn't. It's
No,
the same.
I think how we fuel ourselves is changing massively as well.
Yeah.
Like even, as I said earlier, I was in London for the last 3 years, and before that I was working in Dublin and in Monaghan and stuff, and even the amount of kind of healthy food options that are in Dublin now compared to when I left is ridiculous. And everything's changing all the time, but I think if you look at it goes back to awareness. There's a lack of awareness from people, because there's probably conflicting advice given all over the place about what is good or what is bad, and I think it again has to come back to individualization. If there's a service out there, which hopefully I've discovered it and I'm trialing it, if there's a service out there that helps a person to understand what feels them best, work with that. But it comes back to so many things. I mean, is your gut health good? Are your hormones in a balanced kind of state? Do you understand stress? How do you react and respond to stress, etc., etc.?
And it's like the fitness world, or not the fitness world, sorry, the diet world and nutrition world, I should say, is such an incredibly difficult kind of quagmire of information these days. Because, I mean, there's still things that are absolutely crap that have been shown to be that. I mean, like the classic one is the low fat, high carbohydrate diet. I mean, that's based on an absolutely bullshit study that someone did almost 100 years ago now. And
it's still being touted left, right, and centre.
Still doctors say it, and I mean, I'd love to know how many people lost their lives because of that. Yeah. Because, diabetes and everything else. And I know it's, for anyone listening, obviously you're kind of going, well, how do I find out the information? And there isn't an easy answer. It isn't like, oh, just go here and look at this. Yeah. Yes, there are people we can point you to who will help you. But with nutrition, you do kind of need to look at, or with anything, with therapy or with fitness, you need to kind of look at what is working and try to figure out why that is working.
Establish a baseline first. Yeah. Establish the factors that contribute. Yeah. And then start to work with changing things maybe. Yeah.
And I mean, I understand for most people, like, you work a busy job, you have kids and a mortgage and all that stuff, and it's difficult to do these things. I do understand that. But I mean, even the classic one I always give with nutrition advice to people is what your grandparents used to feed you. Your veg and your meat. Your 2 veg and meat. You can't really go wrong with it. We all know that stuff is pretty good. We kind of inherently know that eating a load of sugary or fried food is probably not too great for us either. And there is a portion of that kind of intuition, as you say, that kind of needs to be understood with people.
Yeah, definitely. I suppose I can only look at my own grandparents, and one of my grandfathers is 90 and still has that meat and 2 veg every day and a couple of cups of tea and a little bit of apple tart, and goes out in the farm every day. So definitely works. I think that's actually leading on to an interesting train of thought. Whether it's relevant or not, I don't know. But I think in general, people don't move half as much as they used to 20, 30 years ago. I think that plays a role. How big, I don't know. It plays a role in terms of some of the stuff I see in clinic. There's a lot of people who are sedentary, don't exercise, are desk-based.
A friend of mine, it's actually quite a timely thing that you say, and sent me a very interesting study that was done of comparing modern people to like kind of native tribe people,
Mm-hmm.
and they figured out that we were basically moving the same amount of time. Like they were sedentary almost the same amount of time
Really?
as a
Wow.
as
I know
a modern human. But what they found the major difference was we're sedentary in like a single position.
that. Okay.
So what I mean by that is that we'd be sitting at
Yeah.
a desk and we'd be sedentary there, whereas they might be lying down or sitting by a fire or kind of moving about a lot more
There's
while they're
variability,
sedentary.
yeah.
And I found that so fascinating because
Yeah.
it was, it kind of took into account of, well, they work for, let's say, 4 hours. And yeah, obviously the intensity of that might be more, but then they kind of factor in, well, we in the West might be walking to places or doing various other things. Obviously that's not kind of there's plenty of variability between all of this, but I really found it fascinating to see that. And they're kind of saying that there was, I forget the exact agency, but there's a friend of mine whose wife actually works for the Canadian Space Agency.
Cool.
I don't know what it's called, but she sent me a really interesting piece about what kind of atrophies the body the most.
Yeah.
And they've kind of found this through astronauts was just staying still in any one position.
Wow.
It wasn't.
Yeah.
It wasn't like sitting the whole time or lying the whole time. It was the lack of variability between those positions.
Yeah.
And I think it's kind of like flexibility that when you actually get into those ranges, your body kind of goes like, oh, I'm okay here.
Mm-hmm.
Rather than like you just stay stiff and the body just stays stiff.
Yeah, I mean, the thought that popped into my head there was talk about bracing.
Yeah.
And a lack of flow in a body, it will change things. How? Not exactly sure in terms of it could, like I explain, from a movement perspective, for me, organ health would be a good breath, a spine that extends and flexes, laterally flexes, side bends both ways, rotate both ways, pelvis that does the opposite, and everything in between. Every time you move, that will stimulate movement through your body, and that flow is important for health, I think.
But I mean, even a very simple thing that most people really ignore, and I know people even get like annoyed when I say it to them, but a lot of people don't know how to breathe.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that sounds very contradictory to people, but anyone listening, if you put your hand on your stomach, when you breathe, does that move in and out? Or is it your chest moving in and out? Because if it's your chest, then you're not using your diaphragm, you're not breathing.
You're just not breathing as efficiently or as effectively as you possibly could, yeah.
And I kind of had not an argument, but kind of a chat with a coach recently about barefoot walking and barefoot shoes.
Mm-hmm.
And what you're saying made a lot of sense, but we're kind of talking about the topic of running, and what I say to people is that, yeah, you can be fine, you can be kind of injury-free and safe with anything, but you can always do things better.
Yeah.
And kind of the same goes for running. Obviously, you put on your nice padded shoes and go for a run, yeah, you'd be fine. Maybe it'll never cause an issue, but you could also learn how to run in a minimalist shoe and kind of learn technique to run.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I've done 2 Tough Mudders in the same shoes as you wore in today, the New Balance Minimalist, and had absolutely no issues. I think shoes are an interesting one. It's one of the things I talk about a lot in clinic with people that come in and they'll say, I've had orthotics. For me, an orthotic is a stopgap. It doesn't, unless the person has a structural limitation in their foot that's been there through trauma, or they have a genuine leg length discrepancy, and it's a whole other can of worms because I don't see too many of them. I think I've seen about 3 proper ones in my career. I think if you wear a shoe that restricts movement in your foot, then you're not allowing your foot to behave like your foot could behave. And through that, you've got an amazing piece of kit down at the bottom of each of your legs. You've a foot with 26 bones, 33 joints that moves through 5 phases on the ground and another one in the air. With every step you take, each joint, most of them anyway, will get 3 planes of motion. So I think I worked it out. You've got 580 possible joint movements in every single step in each foot.
Like the classic one I like to give with that example to people is, imagine you had like a leather mitten that you wore all the time, but had a really thick pad on the palm. Imagine you had to do everything in your day-to-day life with that.
Yeah.
Like, imagine how useless your hands would be after a period of time.
I mean, the sensory feedback that you get with a barefoot shoe, in my experience, is a hell of a lot better than with a padded shoe. And I, as we spoke about whenever I got here, I love the barefoot shoes. I love the Vivo barefoot stuff. I love the minimalist shoes. So I think they allow my feet to move like feet. We're all on our feet every single day. It's how we get about, most of us anyway. If we're fortunate enough to not be off our feet and stuff. And again, there's another lack of awareness of what a foot can do.
Yeah.
Feet can do some incredible things, and I've seen some incredible adaptations in a foot to limit movement somewhere else in the chain. If you think about it, feet connect us to the earth, and the ground reaction force that we have every time we take a step transmits upwards through our body from up towards our head. Eyes want to stay level with the horizon, and everything else has to organize itself underneath. We can achieve some incredible kind of ways of doing that. Some painful and some not.
Like, I find the whole training your feet thing fascinating, because I had a coach who I trained under for a while, and she spent, I think it was 3 months, she spent learning how to, standing, just move the big toe, just lift it up and down. Mm-hmm. And I was like, damn, that's hardcore.
Yeah.
But like, as mad as it is, and I've only ever seen it with kids. I've never seen an adult. Now, if anyone can prove me wrong, send me a video. But I've never seen a video or a person up close where they could articulate each toe independently.
Interesting. No, it tends to be big toe and then the other. Like,
put it this way: if anyone can lift just their baby toe, send it on to me, because I can never do it. I mean, I can kind of do the wave and kind of figured out over quite a while just to almost move the big toe, but the other toes, and they can do it. I've seen people do it. I've seen children do it. By the time you reach adulthood, they're just kind of so numb to the world that you don't bother with them.
You stick your feet into foot gloves and you're not going to get the same movement that you would if you're naturally walking on the earth. Or at least, for me, a barefoot shoe allows your foot to move a little better and a little more like a normal foot, and that generally will transmit up into movement capacity upstairs of that as well. So.
Even you're saying movement capacity, like the parkour stuff that I do, like balancing on rails. If you do that in a hard shoe versus a soft shoe, it's incredibly different.
Oh yeah, you're missing feedback.
Yeah,
it's feedback is the key, I think, in a lot of ways. And if you see people strapping areas of their body up to limit movement and stuff like that, and it may help at the time of an injury and stuff like that, but it's a lot of feedback that gets lost when you do that. I mean, I think there was a study, I don't know exactly where I can find it, but you strap fingers together. I think it's something silly like after 45 minutes your brain starts thinking of one thing. Wow. It starts to remap some of the...
Oh, yeah. I mean, that doesn't surprise me. Like, I see that in jiu-jitsu and judo all the time. Yeah. Because guys will strap their fingers together to avoid hand injuries or whatever. Yeah, Jesus.
I don't know, I'll have to go and dig that out wherever I've read that before, but
it wouldn't surprise me.
Definitely is the capacity to do that.
It's like that kind of like that classic magic trick where where someone puts their hand on yours and then like you move theirs and can feel your own.
Yeah.
It's
I mean, there's lots of stuff that people have, we will never know about the human brain and how it represents things and stuff like that. You've heard of like mirror box therapy and stuff. People with phantom limb pain, people would say phantom limb. My fist is clenched and I can't unclench it. And, you pop your hand into a mirror box and open your normal hand, and because it's a reflected image, the person feels like their other hand is open, the hand that's not there, and that sometimes gives relief of pain and stuff like that. Is amazing. Yeah, it's really amazing.
The brain has some incredible things that it can do for. Well, again, going back to pain and what you do. I mean, the brain really, like how it interprets pain.
Yeah, it's
incredible.
The biggest factor you see is the perception of threat, perception of tissue damage, and at times that is the kind of one of the biggest kind of factors that goes towards the generation of pain. And that perception of threat can take any kind of form. There's a really kind of famous story. I think there's a guy that showed up at an A&E in Lancashire, I think it was, with a nail through his boot. He landed on on a rusty nail, and I mean, apparently any pain medication he was given couldn't touch the pain, and he ended up having the boot surgically removed. And when they got it off him, they figured out that the nail actually went straight between his toes and didn't touch him. So that's a nice little example of how, you know, the perception of threat. Obviously, looking down and seeing a nail coming out of your boot is a threat.
Yeah, your brain's like, oh,
but the perception of that, even if it didn't actually cause damage to his body, it was enough to give him a lot of pain. So yeah, it's understanding the perception of threat and the threat that what form that takes, I suppose, for each person. There, we're back to individualization.
Yeah.
Seems to be a theme tonight.
Run theme, I like it.
Yeah.
It's I mean, it was like the first time I ever kind of looked into pain science and all that stuff. I remember looking at the I don't know what they call it, like the charts that they give people, and it's kind of like 1 to 10 of like a happy face and a really angry face or sad face, whatever. Yeah, it's people going like, oh, I'm kind of 6 or 7, and other people are like, oh, I'm 10, I'm 11 if that was possible.
Yeah.
And it's like I find that it's quite funny when I did my wrist in. I went to the doctor and she kind of said like, oh, after the surgery, what painkillers did they give you? And I was like, no.
Mm-hmm.
She was like, what, you didn't have any? I was like, oh, I took some Nurofen that night and that was it. She was like, oh, we should get you back in to talk to people about pain or whatever. It's just like,
well, I mean, I have a similar story. I had my appendix out when I was about 14, and obviously, I think I came out of theatre in the evening time and kind of woke up drowsy and had some water, went back to sleep, and then I woke up in the middle of the night and needed to go to the bathroom. I was on a drip, and I obviously just had, you know, abdominal surgery, so there's no nurses about, and I just thought, sure, there's no nurses about, I just better go to the toilet. So I went to the corner. I got up and went to the toilet and didn't have that much pain, to be honest. The nurse came in when I was at the toilet. Where the hell is he? Started running. You know, pain is an interesting one, and I mean, I think a lot of people, you know, experience pain and it causes a fear of movement, and some people experience pain and pass no heed to it, and you've got to get every extreme and everything in between as well. But yeah, we're back to awareness on pain and stuff again. The things keep coming up.
Perfect. It's like I try to explain it with flexibility to people that kind of, like, I'm sure you've seen like people getting hip surgeries. Like the classic one I love to show people is like, and if anyone wants to YouTube this, there's some great videos of like people in their 80s and 90s getting hip surgery, and the doctors there throwing the hip behind their head or the leg behind their head. You kind of go,
I've actually been in the theatre watching.
Seen it.
Yeah,
literally putting that leg behind the person's head to get in on it. And you're kind of thinking like, wait, what? Like, how does someone in the 90s essentially doing like a full splits? And you try to say to people, well, all stretching is just teaching your body to be comfortable in those end ranges. Obviously, there's a strength element to it as well. And kind of the example I like to give to people with like the middle splits is, how long can you stand with your feet together? For most people, it's probably an hour before you get uncomfortable. And I say, all right, now put your feet 4 feet apart. How long can you stand there? Right, now put the feet as wide as you can. How long can you stand there? It's just, a lot of the time it's a strength thing, and your brain kind of freaks out going like, oh, I'm going to get hurt here, I'm going to get hurt here.
I think that's the kind of gradual exposure to what you want to achieve. You know, if you do it short and sharp, potentially your brain might go, I'm not too sure on that. You do it a little bit at a time and move towards it every day or a couple times a day or whatever it is. It generally is a little more, the tortoise beats the hare, I think, in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I think that's, especially like the flexibility stuff, you know, people get very frustrated because it's so slow and incremental, and it's not like like you're weightlifting, you put a big plate on each day, and you know, by the end of 3 or 4 months, you're like, oh, X number is off the floor now. Like, I always laugh. I had this kickboxer I was training for a while, and I'll never forget, he came in and he's warming up. This was maybe like 3 months after we've been working together, and he came in and he's just warming up, just touching his toes, you know, bouncing around. I was like, holy shit, man! Like, you're touching your toes. He's like, oh yeah, I guess I am. Now, when he started, he could barely touch his knees. The stage, he was just happy as Larry. Touch the toes. And I think people, like, with, again, like, kind of with pain, and actually, this is kind of the point I wanted to ask you about, that incrementally these things will change. And I think, I don't know, do you see it with people where maybe the injury is healed, but then the brain is still kind of hanging on to that interpretation of like, oh, this is still
I think
bad.
I think physiologically most tissues in the body will heal generally within 6 months. There can be some that last a little longer after surgeries and stuff, but generally within 6 months. After that, as I would say in clinic, there can be some sensitivity left around an injury site that may persist for a few months after that again, or may persist indefinitely until something is done about it, maybe. And that will influence movement for sure. That will influence how your brain perceives what's happening in your body. So if you've, like for example, if you've ruptured your cruciate ligament and you've actually completely torn it, they obviously replace it with a graft, and that makes the knee mechanically stable, but you lose information because it's not a living kind of proprioceptive piece of kit anymore, and that changes things. You see that people's movement changes a little around the knee, and the brain, I think it apparently takes more information from other structures, is what the current thinking is that on that. And I mean, you can see big kind of layovers, I see it anyway in clinic, from previous injuries, that might not be painful whatsoever. I mean, you could have a fractured ankle that has no pain whatsoever, and the opposite shoulder's hurting. Sometimes you go and you move that, get that foot and ankle moving like an ankle and foot could, and the body position that was adopted because of that ankle, so let's say they shifted away from it, that alters the spinal mechanics, that alters where the scapula is, and that alters where the shoulder function is. So you get them to move back over on top of that previously injured ankle, and next thing you take tension out of one place and put it back into another, you take compression out of one and put some tension in there and whatever, and stuff starts to function a little bit more efficiently. You see that every day.
I remember chatting to a physio a while ago, and she was telling me that she'd had someone who was getting horrific shoulder pain for a long time, and she figured out after a while that he'd actually sprained a muscle in his hand playing handball.
Yeah.
And like some tiny muscle that was causing all this, and the guy for ages was like, oh no, it's definitely my shoulder, it's definitely this.
Absolutely. I mean, I see those connections all the time. I mean, some of the work I do is neurological in basis, and some of the connections you see in the body are incredible. How maybe the ligaments in your ankle might affect your neck, or how your abdominal muscles maybe are not functioning like they totally could. Maybe that you can recruit them, but you're a little downregulated at times, and you get that sorted, and it completely changes how a person moves, and they feel this stuff from pre-intervention to post-intervention. Jesus, that's different.
There was I always tell people about this, but I wish I could find the name of the bloody artist. There was an artist who did these fantastic kind of sketch drawings of the human body. Like, the one I remember vividly is just someone taking a step. So it was the outline of the human body, and she, I believe it was a woman, only coloured in the connections of where that step is. So all the way from the tippy toe all the way up to wherever it is in the back of the head almost. And it's such a fascinating thing to show people, to be like, look, this is how it's not just this little tiny part of your body; it connects everything.
That's kind of one of the approaches I've studied is in human movements, and of course called anatomy in motion. So I know there's quite a few AIM practitioners here in Ireland. There's all over the world at this stage, but it's a thought processor in human movement, developed by a guy called Gary Ward over in London, and it's phenomenal. You can take a restriction in one joint in the body and then start to map out the effect that it can have potentially on any other part of your system. We are a closed loop system, so we interact, all of our joints interact with each other and give feedback and everything, and every single step you take, there's a massive journey going through. For example, a lot of people say to me that they brace their spine whenever they're moving, and that will limit some movement. And not a lot of people know that when you when you walk, with every step you take, your spine extends and flexes, side bends both ways and rotates in 6 different phases every time you take a step. So there's a hell of a lot more movement happening than some people are actually aware of. Yeah, it's phenomenal.
Is that awareness?
Yeah, oh, damn it. Yeah, it is. It is phenomenal. Human bodies are absolutely amazing, and I am unashamedly a geek in that way.
I think once you get into any of these fields, you do start to, well, hopefully, kind of geek out on this stuff. Because I know I do big time that, like, never can stop learning. Like, there's always...
I get told, one of the pieces of feedback I heard quite a bit on the phone when I speak to people is that, my God, you're passionate about what you do. And I kind of think, really? Am I? To me, I know no other way. I really just... I am passionate, actually.
Yeah.
I love it. I really have an interest, and it's been born out of frustration. I think is it Dr. John DeMartini says your voids dictate your values, which I love that. Stuff that you're kind of lacking in, you seek. So yeah, I definitely have had a lack of understanding and awareness at the early parts of my kind of journey as a therapist, and there's loads of, every time I learn something new, it adds more questions, which is amazing. It's a back to a lifelong journey for sure.
But I do think that takes a special kind of mindset for people to do that, because I know, again, just coming back to the kind of fitness field, there's a lot of people who will do whatever certification and that's it. I don't know about the therapy world, but I see all the time when people are like, alright, I've done that and now that's it. Like, I don't need to learn anymore. Yeah, you're kind of going, well, like, you could spend a decade learning how to train someone's hands, never mind whatever else.
I just this week gone past, I treated a sports therapist in training, and he said to me, I've learned more in the last 90 minutes with you than I have in the last 18 months. Maybe not, but certainly able to show him some things that wouldn't have been on the curriculum that he might have been taught and stuff, and just to even if he's interested in it, to open up a different possibility, a different way of working with the body, for example, is phenomenal. I mean, I think there's some people, amazing people out there doing some amazing things, and I suppose it's like every single discipline will have them. Ireland has a lot of people who have a lot of stuff to offer in terms of training, health, fitness, therapy.
I mean, it's the exact reason why I started this podcast, because I know so many, and there are so many incredibly talented, pick a discipline in Ireland.
Yeah.
Like, so I have yourself on as a therapist, and I've had coaches, I've had, practitioners of sports, and I think the big... I don't know if it's a problem, but it's definitely something that happens in this country, is that we're very self-deprecating. That we, not all of us, but a lot of people don't like to, kind of big themselves up.
Yeah.
I always use the Bono comparison. A lot of Irish people really dislike Bono, but he's done a lot of good.
Yeah.
He's done a lot of work for charity or whatnot. So I think, like we were kind of joking about earlier, that Plato quote of empty vessels make the loudest noise. That within any discipline, there is a lot of people who are very brash and love to talk and market themselves, and I'm great and I got this perfect solution for you. But you'll often find that some of the best people in the world at their disciplines don't like to talk about it. They don't really big it up. They're not like. You ever see Jiro Dreams of Sushi?
No.
So really fascinating documentary. I highly recommend. Yeah, he's so it's this guy Jiro, who at one, I don't know if he's still alive, but he was accredited with being the best sushi restaurant in the world.
Okay.
I think there was about 5 seats in it, and it was in a train station in Tokyo, and there was like a 3-month waiting list to get in. And if the menu is set by him on the day, you don't ask for it. You turn up and he'll feed you whatever he feels like.
Yeah.
And he's just incredibly humble about it. He doesn't want to talk about it. Like, even like showing up to awards, he didn't really like to do it. And what I loved about it, and it's kind of what we touched on earlier, and I wrote about it recently, that there's this concept that the Japanese have called the Shoshin mindset, which is the beginner mindset.
Mm-hmm.
That no matter how advanced you feel you are, you're always a beginner.
Yeah.
And there's a scene in it that's, I suppose from a Western point of view, it's a bit like much, but this guy completes this egg dish that he'd been trying for, I think, almost like 10 years to perfect. And eventually he says to him, like, Jiro goes to him, like, yes, you did it. And the guy almost, like, visibly trying to break down, like, not break down and cry. And, like, I see guys like that, and I've seen craftsmen like that. Like, I grew up around shipyards and stuff in my youth, and some of the best guys that you'd see, unless you knew him or knew a friend of his, you wouldn't find them.
Yeah, 100%.
And I think that's kind of, a lot of these fields kind of, through the fitness field and therapy field, a lot of the time it just kind of spreads through word of mouth.
Yeah, I definitely think that. I mean, in terms of, I suppose the way my experience of running a business over here, I don't like to talk about therapy as a business. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, it has to be as well. I think the majority of my the people that come to see me will come through word of mouth. There's a few that come through the social media stuff, and I'm not the most vocal or the most out there on social media. I do a little bit. It's kind of the in thing to do these days, to push yourself out there and stuff. And it's kind of a little bit against my natural disposition, but I think when you help someone, or you provide a service for someone, or you help them create change, or whatever it's going to be that you're doing, if they're happy with what you've done and enjoyed it, then they'll talk about it. And I think Ireland as a country is massive for word of mouth, huge for word of mouth. Even I've noticed a big difference coming from London, just before Christmas, and coming back to Ireland. Ireland is a hell of a lot more word of mouth. It's good if you can create change for people and help them with whatever they need. You generally will be sort of busy, but word of mouth is a great way to build a business in certain fields, for sure.
And I think, obviously, like anything, they can be a double-edged sword at times, because I do know, like within any field, it can kind of be like, oh, this guy did this. Like, the classic one I've seen within the therapy world is, someone does, some soft tissue work, for example. Mm-hmm. And the person goes like, oh, that was amazing. I fixed everything and I feel fantastic. And you kind of go like, that's great, but is the issue gone? And sometimes it is. Maybe, sometimes maybe it was just the brain doing what the brain does.
I think what you could say about that experience is maybe that it wasn't soft tissue, maybe it was. I think the person's understanding of what happened to them and the input that was given to the nervous system was exactly what they needed at that time. If you could be that person that gives that exact piece the person needs every time.
Yeah. That's
wow.
That's the journey of any coach.
That's the goal if you want to be a miracle worker, I suppose. But it's definitely a very difficult thing to be able to even think about doing, let alone market yourself as doing that.
Yeah, I think a lot of the people who I've trained kind of get somewhat amazed by the amount of detail I look for when I first train someone. Mm-hmm. And again, it's coming back to that individualized approach that, the demands of the individual are so very different, especially when it comes to what you do with, dealing with pain and therapy, that, we can try. Again, like what we were saying with doctors, a lot of people like to have the kind of special cure-all, like this is what I'm. That's not necessarily a bad thing, because for a lot of people it can come from a very good place, where it's like, oh, this is what I'm good at, I'll help someone with whatever. And that assessment, I think, is the biggest thing for a lot of this stuff, that figuring out what is the cause of this.
Yeah, I think for people in pain, I know in the therapy circles you hear a lot of times people are giving out about a lot of different things. I think there's you'll hear bad stories about everything, basically, and you'll not hear too many stories when let's say a hospital bias, if you want to call it, of mine would be, where possible, to avoid having surgery, for pain, especially if it's a life-saving surgery. Obviously, that no sense whatsoever. Please have the surgery. If it's for pain, I think surgery for pain possibly not as successful as it's touted to be. Like that's you'll get people who have horror stories after surgery, but you'll also get a ton of people who it was the exact thing that they needed. And there's a lot of people who are quick to badmouth a lot of kind of approaches like surgery or whatever it might be, or my approach, whatever it is. But for some people, it's exactly what they need, and there's a lot of people who benefit from it too. So I think when you look at the argument and give it a bit more balance, it's obviously better than coming down totally on one side.
I think, especially within the medical field, that does kind of baffle me, but people don't really look for a second opinion. You know, if someone comes to me and they think like, oh, you know, those methods that you use for training people, they're not good, I'll go look at someone else, or I'll look over here, see this thing. I think within the medical field, it's often, well, my doctor told me that, they know best, I'll go do it.
Yeah. And
I do understand that. I mean, yeah, that's why you go to the doctor, but again, like it's a very limited space of time that you will see that person, and they're incredibly busy, you know.
Yeah, I think we kind of spoke about this, you know, no matter how good your doctor or your therapist or your personal trainer, whoever it's going to be, they are human at the end of the day, and they're not maybe going to be perfect every time. I think Ireland has a bit of a culture of running to the doctor, and I think that's partly been born out of a lack of options as well. I think there's a hell of a lot of things appearing and different disciplines and approaches, you know, springing up in Ireland. There's a lot of, like, maybe even I would notice it coming back from London, like osteopaths and chiropractors. You don't really have here too many of them over here. They're definitely the exception, whereas maybe over in the UK where I was, they're a lot more prevalent and stuff. I mean, I think, you know.
See, I also think that Irish people are incredibly skeptical.
Yeah, there's a bit of that.
I think,
like, for sure.
Like especially within my own field, that like the classic one, and it does baffle me that, you know, the ridicule that Ido Portal got training with Conor McGregor, and you're kind of looking at it going like, okay, I understand it's unusual stuff or whatever, but you would have thought there would have been an explosion from it when the guy wins 2 world titles. But you know, the Irish are very much like,
I think we're a nation of sameness rather than difference in a lot of ways.
I remember talking to someone about, I think it might have been parkour or whatever it was, and he's kind of giving the example that Ireland's almost always 10 years behind anywhere else in Europe. Not out of a bad place, but it's just the Irish are often very like, I don't know about that now. And I think, especially with things like osteopaths and chiropractors and stuff, there's very much you can't be going to that voodoo now, you know, you kind of got to be wary of this stuff and all that.
That's the kind of prevailing notion, and what I do is probably going to be even thought of in those terms and maybe more, but I think at the end of the day there's always going to be people who want to do the same thing and have tried and trusted methods, and no issues with that whatsoever. There's also a role for people who want to do something different. I think what I see, maybe I'm wrong, I think what I see in Irish culture, maybe it's just I'm in the circles more, but I see a more of an appetite for something outside of the normal type of training, the normal type of therapy, the normal type of movement work, the normal type of routine, nutrition, etc. I suppose with we look at it as a cultural thing with the amount of people who are starting their own business and stuff now, just lend different time freedoms and different questions and different answers for people.
I think, like, especially from an industry perspective, that this country has gotten, like you say, to a large degree, it's very much a country of sameness, and I think it reached a point within probably the past 10, 15 years where we've kind of reached a point where we don't want sameness all the time.
Yeah.
Like the kind of classic example would be the food and the coffee scene in this country.
Yeah. Oh wow.
Yeah, like it's
a scene that just exploded out of nowhere. Like.
And I think we kind of realized, like, we have a good selection of stuff, and it doesn't have to be the same. You know, we can have a wide variety of stuff, and we can kind of have what we want. And I think that's slowly spreading into other fields.
Yeah, I think agree with that. Yeah, for sure.
I think it takes time, and obviously it takes time for these things to get proven and there to be a track record. Like it's very easy to make wild claims. It's a lot harder to prove them.
Yeah, a lot harder to prove consistently too.
Yeah, especially.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose if I apply that kind of statement to what I do, I'm you know, I suppose in my mindset, I'm looking at each person as a person, I have to prove that, to myself that what I'm doing is the right thing for that person, and it's a little bit of pressure, but it's something I willingly take on. It's aim to do my best for every single person. It's, a little bit of perfectionist that's inside me would want. You're only a couple of off days away from potentially not so good times. So yeah, it's
yeah. I mean, like you said, I mean, regardless of the profession, at the end of the day, people are people. I've had it where I've shown up to train someone and I had a really crappy day, but you do have to just kind of go like, right, I mean, it's not about this and let's go. But like, it can be very. I've chatted to people with this about all sorts of different seminars and stuff where someone kind of, you can tell they're not in quite a good mood, and maybe they aren't using any best sort of off language, or they're not kind of acting bad, but you can kind of just that energy kind of changes.
Their body language, yeah. I think a lot of people underestimate how well we read body language, how well we interpret unconscious communication. There's so much of it. So much of it on a daily basis. You can walk into a room and sometimes sense, if you want to call it that, the kind of vibe in the room, and you may not realise why you do it. I think a lot of it is I don't know if you've read Blink by Malcolm Gladwell.
Another one on the list of things to read.
It's the same sort of thing. It's the unconscious. You know the person, for example, you walk in this room with, and you know them so well that you can immediately pick up unconsciously that something is not right.
Yeah, it's I think I mentioned this on the podcast with Frederick, but yeah, it's within jiu-jitsu, like within grappling, it's something that you notice almost immediately because you're trying to choke the life out of someone on a daily basis, and you can tell as soon as you put your hands on them, you're kind of like, what's wrong, man? Like, you can tell like they're not moving in the normal way, or that there's kind of something going on. I know for people who've never done that sort of thing, it sounds a bit weird, but like you
totally get it.
Like, even from a very simple perspective, for like your dog comes into you, and your dog's acting weird and gets up on your lap, and the ears are down and it's kind of huddled up to you. Immediately, you know something's wrong. It doesn't have to use words to say it to you.
Yeah.
You can pick it up on it very quickly, and I think we're very rash to kind of ignore that stuff. But
we dismiss it a lot.
Yeah, and I understand. I mean, classic quote is it, if you open your mind too much, your brain will fall out. And I do understand that, be skeptical. You should be skeptical of things.
It's healthily skeptical.
Yeah. It's what's that quote? Have a good bullshit filter. You got to understand how to filter out the bad stuff.
Yeah, for sure.
And it was something I did plan on writing about recently, that like that very famous Bruce Lee quote of discard what's useless and retain what's useful.
Yeah.
And I kind of put like a little caveat on that of, discard what's useless, but hold on to it because it might be useful in the future.
Yeah.
And I think, like, especially when it comes to treating any kind of ailment that a person might have, that person, you shouldn't kind of discard everything and just be like, oh no, this is all terrible. Like, you do kind of have to be like, all right, well, maybe I do need to work on this or work on that, or maybe that thing that I thought was silly, maybe this will help me.
Absolutely. I think your current understanding, you might think, that's never going to be useful for me, but it might be useful for one person that you might meet in your whatever discipline you're in. And if you still remember it and still are able to use that for that one person, that can be the difference between a good result and a bad result for them. And I definitely think, for me as a therapist, the more tools I have in my box that I can use with people, or the more ways that I can explain things, the more kind of ways I can connect with people, communicational kind of standpoint, it has to benefit. It might not be used all the time every day, and some things can get rusty when that happens, but I think, a bit of variation and a bit of kind of I would hesitate to use the jack of all trades, master of none. Because I think you can get quite good at quite a lot of things. Depends what your definition of mastery is, and how far along the spectrum is it that
the term I always use for mastery is if someone calls themselves one, they're not.
Yeah.
If someone else calls them one, then they might be. I forget who said that to me. It was someone within some martial arts circle said that to me before, and I went, you know what, you're probably right. Because if enough of their peers are saying like, no, this guy's mastered whatever, then chances are he might have a good understanding of it.
For sure.
But the fella is kind of self-proclaimed, Jesus of whatever.
Yeah.
He just kind of like, I don't know about that.
I think stay humble and always learn is a decent approach.
But like what you're saying, I mean, it's a very hard thing to kind of keep that humility at times and go like, right, I need to hold on to this information because of, I might, I don't even know how to word this correctly, but at that time I might have a certain bias towards whatever, and I might think like, right, this is what this person needs, and in the back of your brain's kind of going, oh, maybe they need this thing, maybe it's that thing that you thought was useless.
I also think, especially I've been fortunate to learn some amazing stuff through all the education I've done, and I think those little thoughts that come up in your brain sometimes are your unconscious pattern recognition springing in and going, pay attention to this. You can disregard it and maybe miss the opportunity, and a lot of times I won't really get an understanding of why I'm drawn towards an area of a person's body. I think it must be some sort of unconscious recognition that there's something up there, there's something that's not maybe moving like it could or whatever. I think it's a little intuitive, if you want to call them that. I don't really believe in intuition. I think it's a process of deep learning and pattern recognition in a way.
I totally agree with you that it is kind of a pattern recognition over time, because I've seen it in countless disciplines. Like
what that book, The Art of Learning, is all about.
Like from martial arts to crafts to like woodworkers. I mean, I've seen guys who kind of unconsciously recognize something, and you kind of say, "Oh, why did you do that?" And it's like, I just felt right.
Yeah.
And you kind of don't expand on that, but and I think there is, and that starts to, well, from my mind, anyways, show that kind of tentative word, but that mastery of the craft that you're starting to understand. Like, right, maybe there is just a pattern recognition.
I think it's always going to be a continual journey, because the more you strive for perfection, the harder it gets to get there. And in a way, every step, at the start might be huge, and exponentially get a hell of a lot smaller and smaller, but you're still moving in the right direction, hopefully.
I mean, even like you were saying earlier, I mean, you spend all these years learning, the basics of therapy, so to speak, and then now you're understanding the language of therapy and how much of an effect that can have on someone. It's a continuous process.
And do you know, one of the things that I would say, if there's any therapists out there listening, the most important thing is actually the basics. Like every one of those kind of the principles that underpin something are the most important things. I come back to my anatomy day in, day out. And at the time when I started to learn it, I was bored silly because it was taught to me in a way I didn't really understand or didn't connect with, I suppose. But every single day, the differentiation between someone's symptoms and, say, distribution of a nerve, for example, goes back to anatomy every single day. There's those principles that are really, really, really important.
One thing I would usually recommend to people is Muscle Premium. You can get all that. Is that the one?
Or was it one of the apps that's...
I think that's the name of it. I have it there, but I don't want to open it and crash this computer on myself. I had it recommended to me when I was doing my PT course a few years ago, and it's just a really handy anatomy tool. It's basically like a 3D model, and you can pull muscles off and name them. But I think it's like
Essential Anatomy or something.
It's like $5 or $10. And just even anyone who's just kind of interested in how the body works, I'd recommend having a look at it.
It's amazing. I mean, I suppose those kind of underlying principles, know your anatomy, know your basic movements, know that sort of stuff, and if you have a sound grounding in that, then you can really start to progress from it, I think. I suppose the whole talk comes back around to the basics are the advanced things, and the advanced things are the basics.
And it's that understanding, understanding of the body. I mean, it's obviously it's two people who have a major interest in the area, but I mean, I've actually been quite surprised by the people who message me about this podcast and the people that we get listening to it. Some really very people who I wouldn't have expected to listen to it.
Yeah.
And what I would say is, I understand, busy, you do whatever in your life, but a little kind of half hour here or there to just look at some anatomy or kind of figure out what is that thing in my body that works that way. Yeah. Or, what is that diet thing that I'm interested in?
If you can't figure it out yourself, there'll be someone out there, or the internet obviously is a phenomenal thing for gathering information that you can go, oh, there's somebody who actually might be able to teach me, or
I mean, it's something that I say to clients all the time, that if I don't know the answer, I'll find someone smarter than me who knows it, because I can't know everything.
Yeah.
And especially like yourself within the therapy field. I mean, I don't know, but I mean, I'm sure there's some random fields that you have no idea about. You can't know everything.
I could start to. There's a lot of my therapy colleagues are interested in kind of quantum biology and light and the effects of light on the circadian rhythm, and then there's other people who are massively into nutrition who know what level that I would never get to. It's not kind of in my remit to be into it so in depth. To be able to reach out to someone like that is phenomenal. And
there's a book recommendation for you. It's Chris Kresser's recent one. I think it's called Practical Medicine.
Okay.
It's basically how he is a guy from the States who started I forget what the hospital was, but in conjunction with the hospital, he started a practical medicine practice.
Okay.
Which was to take people with all sorts of different ailments and try treat them from kind of the ground up rather than treating the symptom. And you'd work with he did like a full kind of gut bio screen.
Yeah, cool.
And work out their diets and all that sort of stuff. And, fascinating book. Highly recommend it.
I mean, I think that's an approach that it's not widely available for everybody, and that's the issue. I mean, I suppose if you're lucky enough to have an abundance of financial resources, sometimes you can afford to go and do this sort of thing. You can achieve some incredible things with the human body if you can marry in a few different fields together.
It's it's not a criticism of the medical field, but it takes time to change, and rightly so. It takes time to prove those ideas, like we were saying earlier, and it takes even longer to prove them on a regular, consistent basis.
Yeah,
and it's also an issue with any field, whether it be academic or medical or otherwise. And I've seen it personally within the academic field of people have a vested interest to make sure that their thing stays on top.
Yeah.
That you can't discredit my field because this is how I make my living, or not even that, not even from a monetary point of view, but like this is how I help people. This is how I do the thing I do.
Yeah.
And it's it's also a pretty hard thing for you to ever kind of go like, oh, well, that was bullshit and I was wrong. And I mean, I've got to do it.
A lot of work to climb down sometimes from where we are. I mean, I suppose a little example of that in my field would be that the kind of soft tissue work side of things. I think it does some phenomenal stuff for people. And why and how it does what it does is questionable. A lot of people think you're actually releasing tissue. I think there was a study came out there with Robert Schleich, one of the fascial kind of guys and researchers, and I think they in a cadaver, which was a dead person, it was 925 kilograms of force was required to move the ITB, the iliotibial band, by 1%.
I know that.
1%. So if you think you're actually rolling and stretching and releasing that tissue, I don't think that's actually possible. You're changing input, and that's what's creating some change for you. I think there's, when I kind of read stuff like that, I went, God, maybe my soft tissue work and all the stuff I've been saying to people was not true. Mm-hmm. And I suppose then it's time to change what you or adopt a more kind of coherent and kind of towards the truth kind of narrative, I suppose.
Like it's one thing that, without naming any disciplines, but there's certain times where you'll hear kind of very odd cues, or people will say kind of like the classic one of, oh, well, like this will, if you're stretching whatever it is, and they go like, oh, well, now lengthen the muscles and all this, and you can like, muscles don't lengthen, they're always the same size. It might, now I understand it is actually coming back to that thing of how powerful words can be. You kind of use that input in someone and go like, oh, now lengthen the muscle, and they kind of like, maybe that helps, maybe that helps them feel it, but it's also, then that becomes like, oh, this is exactly what it is. And, my friend told me, oh, this lengthens the muscle, this releases this. And
it's again, I think language and communication for me is probably the biggest issue that we face in our world. Because if I was attempting to communicate something to you, the way it comes together in my head and the words I use to send it forth into the world for you to receive, will be, filtered for me, on the way. The thought will be filtered before it gets out of my mouth. It'll be filtered on the way in for you. Then you'll think about something and come back to me, and it'll be filtered again on the way out, and then I'll interpret that. And the possibility for miscommunication,
like
not intentionally,
I'm sure within your own field, like people trying to explain feelings must be incredibly difficult for you to interpret.
I've heard the most fantastic explanations about the sensations people feel in their body, from feels like I've got a mouse under my skin or ants running all over my body to feels like I have a radiator in my back. It's just some really, really strange descriptions, and I never mean to laugh at anyone giving me a description. Like sometimes the person busts out laughing and says, "I know, isn't it crazy that it sounds like that?" And that's how the best way I can describe it. But yeah, I mean, we're back into this kind of big misunderstood grey area of communication with people, and I think if there's a possibility that we can improve upon that in any way, even by a half of a percent in our general daily communication, I think it would benefit. It's definitely something that I read a lot about, and I attempt to understand as much as I can, because if I can communicate with people better, I can help. I view that I can help people better.
I mean, obviously, we've harped on about it, but having that understanding of your body can make such a massive, massive, massive difference.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, this is probably people have seen on my Instagram a lot, and me showing people how to get the middle splits.
Mm-hmm.
But a massive part of that is, like you were saying earlier, just tilting the pelvis.
Yeah.
And for most people, they've never done it or don't have a clue as to what it is. And I kind of jokingly say to people, probably the most important athletic skill that you can develop is learning how to twerk. And it sounds absurd, and people go like, wait, what? Mm-hmm. And actually, I was out training, doing parkour a few weeks back, and two of the girls were like, Nathan, can you twerk? And I was like, yep. Just showed them.
I'm proud.
Yeah, look at that booty. But as mad as it is, it's, when you have an understanding of how that body part works, it really helps. And the reason I'm touching on this is that, do you notice between, say, like an athlete or someone who kind of is a sports practitioner, or someone who's like just a regular, office worker or whatever, do you notice kind of a difference in how they give you feedback?
Yeah, definitely. I think I had a nice example of it in clinic lately, where there was quite a high level athlete in clinic, and he was so aware of the little movements. I think another example, I spoke to a dancer as well, who is very aware of his body. I think what happens is you're aware of a certain portion of it. There's minutiae inside that are really important. I think from my perspective anyway, as a clinician, if you're looking at someone who can move in all sorts of ways, and maybe, I don't know, people with hypermobility, they're told they can move excessively. I think it's about how you move, not the fact that you can move into that position. If you achieve a toe touch, forward bend and a toe touch by moving predominantly 3 hinge points in your body, 3 areas that you move, whereas you could achieve it also by moving every single joint in a smaller way. It's a very different experience. So yeah, I think in terms of athletes, there's a lot of them who will come and have a very good awareness of their body. There will be also, by contrast, there'll be a lot of people who come in who are gifted athletes and haven't a clue. Their body just does exactly what they need it to do. And then there are people who come in with completely no awareness whatsoever. I think it's a spectrum for everything, And there does tend to be, though, with athletes, they're kind of, especially if they're doing it for a living, their sport or their income, their livelihood depends on it, so they're invested in that way a lot.
Kind of need to know.
Yeah, on a need to know basis, I suppose. But yeah, I do see big variations in how much kind of awareness people have around their movement, around their body. Like I say, I really do think if anyone's out there that is listening and doesn't understand how or what movements are possible in their body, hop on to some of the YouTubes. Actually, there's the guys that I trained under Anatomy in Motion, Gary Ward. If you go on to anatomyinmotion.co.uk, they have a series called Wake Your Body Up, which is a movement series that you can put your body through guided movements, and you will feel things move that you haven't felt before. And I think they also have like a full body movement screen to see where your body can move, and little things like that, will make a big difference for people who are experiencing some pain, or maybe are always wondering why that side of my body is not moving like the other side.
I'll make sure to put a link in the description
as
well.
It's great. I mean, stuff like that's lovely. And even if you're someone who's not really moving that much at the moment and wants to get into it, go and take a class, literally a little yoga class or anything at all. Just I think most people would benefit from having more movement in their life.
It's one thing I say to people, like I've said it I don't know how many times on these podcasts, but you don't have to go to a gym or whatever class to get out and move. You just find something you enjoy that makes you move. It's really as simple as that, and it's not like me being sarcastic about it. No, I mean, I hate playing football. I really don't like doing it. I've never liked doing it as a kid.
We're quite opposite then.
Yeah. I never saw the point of it. I could just pick it up and hit the guy. But my point is, if I had to go and do football solely as my form of fitness, I'd hate it. And I wouldn't enjoy it. And instead, I found something that I enjoyed. And that's the thing, that like, if you can find something that you'll consistently stick at and that gets you out moving, you're going to get a lot more out of it in the long term.
I mean, it could be, like you say, football. It could be parkour. It could be walking. I mean, I think
it really doesn't matter.
Yeah, I mean, I shared it on some of my social media and my Instagram there a few days ago. Every step you take, I basically talked through the joint motions that are possible, the amount of movement that you can get just from walking alone, and the benefits of that. Walking, decreases a lot of major health risks, improves a lot of your concentration, improves your energy levels. It does amazing stuff, and it's so simple. It's free. Everybody, unless obviously we have some injuries and stuff that are preventing.
In which case, you should get on to David.
Most people should be able to get out and do 30 minutes of walking. Massive benefits to it. Those little things, making a little bit of time for yourself to do that can, in some cases, transform things for you.
Yeah, I know people who have literally getting out the door and going for a walk, and it has transformed their lives. Something as simple as that.
I think is it the Pareto principle, that 70-20 rule? What can I do for 20% effort that'll get me 70% results? There's little things like that. You can get onto the internet and find things that you could do, small things that will have big changes, or will possibly create big changes for you. Definitely something to look into if you're not doing anything about it. Take a little bit of responsibility, please, and help yourself. Actually,
it just popped into my head, but if anyone wants to see a rather funny video of someone with kind of quite interesting body awareness, there's C.T. Fletcher.
I know the name, yeah.
Yeah, so he's this kind of famous personality. He was like a big powerlifter back in the day, and then kind of went into bodybuilding and stuff. There's a very funny video of him doing curls, and starts off in his arm, obviously big arms, but he gets halfway and he's shouting at his arm going, "I command you to grow!" And literally by the end of it, his arm's massive as a result of it. But it's hilarious to watch. And I know a few bodybuilders who can, the classic pec dance,
Yeah.
It's when obviously they build awareness and that stuff, but obviously depending on the person, they can die back in other areas as a result.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's nice. We've touched on some nice themes tonight, so like individuality, awareness, communication. I think there's some nice themes that run through what we're talking about. And I think I mean, it's interesting, both of us kind of reflect that in our own way as well.
Well, I think it's important, and I think it's important for people, anyone listening who, isn't a practitioner in these fields, that at the end of the day, you're a person and you're you, and you need to get out and move, and you need to find a practice that suits you. It's that individuality. It's that understanding that, like, let's get out and go for a walk, and let's understand why I need to go for a walk.
Yeah.
And if it's something's hurting me when I'm doing it, well, let's figure out why that is. And if I don't know how to do it, let's find someone who does. And if they don't treat me for me, if they just go like, oh, just I don't know, go roll around on this, then find someone else.
Yeah, you deserve the. Anyone that's listening that has symptoms, your pain, your symptom is definitely real. Anyone, I think I shared this on social media as well. It kind of gets my goat a little. Anyone that says to you that it's all in your head, aka it's imaginary, I don't think they deserve to be working with you.
And one thing to kind of continue on from what you're saying, and this is something that I've said to people a lot, especially when it comes to personal trainers, and again, this is for therapists and anyone in any sort of service field, which is essentially what we do. We provide a service to people. You got to understand that if you're not happy with it, go elsewhere.
Yeah.
It'd be like going to a restaurant and getting served shitty food, and you keep going back just because you like the wait staff.
Yeah.
It's essentially that's what it's like, and
totally. I mean, I would encourage people. I mean, the approach that I take, I do my best to provide progress and results, whatever term you want to put on it, for people when I work with them. If it's not working for someone, I will say to them, look, thank you for coming in. I don't think this is working with you, and please, I've got some people I can recommend. And, I think definitely, if you don't feel that it's starting to create the response or the result that you want, you're totally within your rights to look elsewhere and look for someone who maybe can help you in a different way.
I do the same. I've done it numerous times, and that's kind of one of the great joys that I've done over the past year. I know we can have that little Facebook group of like-minded coaches. But I mean, I'm constantly referring people to, if they want to go and learn whatever, I say, oh, go to this guy, go to that guy here, or that lady. And
that's one of the lovely things about the likes of this podcast, and kind of cultures that are emerging. And I suppose in Ireland at the minute is that there's a lot of people who are now connecting dots with a lot of other people. Like I sometimes get referrals from people that I've never met, and have never met me, have never been treated by me, etc. And I don't know where they come from sometimes. And I feed that forwards. I give people links to different types of information, different approaches all the time, because what I do may help someone and may not help another, and it's just the long and short of it. I mean, the goal, the intention sitting behind it all is to help people. I mean, that's what the culture does. Even this podcast might help somebody to connect to someone that provides a service that really helps them.
You go find a therapist or whatever, or whatever it is that you need. And I think that's a lovely spot to close up on.
Yes, let's do it.
Yeah, so where can people find you if they're looking for you?
So I set my clinic up in Rama on Northwood Road. So if they want to find me, they can pop onto my website. It's www.davidmcgettigan, McGettigan clinic.com, davidmcgettiganclinic.com. I'm on Instagram at Pain and Movement Specialist. And look me up online.
I'll make sure to put links in the various descriptions where this goes out.
I'm around. I do travel for work as well. I have my clinic, primary clinic in Dublin. I've come from London, so I travel back to London every kind of 6 to 8 weeks. I travel to Amsterdam, lots of other places as well. So I'm kind of a little bit more mobile than someone, and that's just I've been fortunate enough to be able to do that. So yeah, please, if you're interested in learning more, give us a shout.
Excellent. Absolute pleasure, David. Thanks a million for your time.
Thank you very much, Nick. It's been lovely.
Right.